Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. Good to see folks. Some familiar faces out there, some new faces. Good to see you all. Hope you're having a great day, a great start of a new year. Maybe as good or better than last year. And I know for some folks that's a low bar, but we're shooting for a great year. It's good to see you all. Let last folks kind of come trickling in here and we'll get started.
Strange.
Feel free if you'd like to drop your name in the chat and where you are. It's always nice to kind of know where people are in the world. So my name is Charles Williams, as you know, with Earth Actors Training, and I'm here in Nova Scotia, the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people, known as Mi'kmaqi. I'm in the area called Skiggiwagik, or Jabuktuk, the harbor. So in Halifax here. And yeah, oh, no, great. Get to see where folks are from. Thanks for putting your name in there. Yeah, we're from all over the world. I love to just do land acknowledgements, and it's I think it's been really good over the last couple of years where we've online so much to do these land acknowledgements. I've really enjoyed being able to look through and see where everybody's from. Granted, my literacy for Indigenous lands, it was not great. Like I knew some, but I'm getting a much better feel. Like I had a colonial map in my mind, which has been real clear. And now I'm really getting this, this is where these different territories are and how they overlapped and how they relate. So I'm glad to see everybody, and thanks for introducing yourself. So along with me here, we've got Chris coming in from Chris Outdoors, and I'll give him a chance to introduce himself.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on a Thursday afternoon here. Maybe I'll just actually, before I introduce myself, I'll just kind of go over the game plan for the night so you kind of know what you're walking into, and then yeah, we'll kind of kick things off here. But yeah, tonight, the title we called tonight's plan is Why Emergencies Fail and How to Make Ones That Do. So obviously we're flowing with this theme of emergency and disaster preparedness in this realm where our world feels a little bit rocky. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that and how that feels. And I have kind of an interesting background where I've done a fair bit of work in modern emergency management, even worked with like kind of governments and hospitals and infrastructure companies in emergency planning. And then I've also applied that in more of the grassroots realms, working with eco-villages and organic farms and summer camps and events and that kind of realm. And I love bridging what I've learned from kind of modern EM with some of these more holistic practices, that Earth activist training really focus in, things like permaculture and regenerative design, things like community building, things like actually deep knowledge of place and the land, and just how do we walk in a good way in this multicultural world that we live in, and be good relatives to all our relatives, both the human and non-relatives. So to me, I use this term holistic emergency management, which is trying to kind of weave all those different pieces together. And tonight, Charles is going to kick us off in a moment here and talk a little bit about actually kind of this idea of like, how do we tend ourselves and maybe even the businesses that we run or the projects we're involved with in this kind of rocky landscape where it feels like there's a lot of things that can be maybe shaking us up and don't feel healthy. So how do we tend ourselves in that and share a little bit on that? And then he's going to pass it over to me to dive into this concept, why emergency plans fail. And I wanted to say, when we talk about emergency plans, this really is applicable whatever hat you're coming here with tonight. So whether you're an individual that's just a little bit worried about the state of the world and you're thinking about your own self, your household, your family, your community's preparedness, or you're maybe thinking about like, what is my role externally to give back to the world in this realm, in this changing climate, in this changing landscape, what can I give back? Maybe you're here with your business hat on tonight. And it's like, hey, I own a business or I work for a business, and we're thinking about how does our business be better prepared and adapted for things. Maybe you work at a school and you're thinking about a school. Maybe you run an event or a festival. All of those kind of layers we're going to be speaking to tonight. And so when I talk about emergency planning, I'm going to try and speak to it in a context that fits the individual, the organization, the event, the business, the school, and so on. And my hope for tonight is that tonight's actually a very empowering call for you, where you come on feeling like, wow, this is a very overwhelming topic that can be kind of scary. And hopefully we're going to make it feel a little bit simpler tonight and a little bit more straightforward. And I really want to kind of bridge this idea of emergency preparedness where we get into the holistic side. And the holistic side, there's a mental side of capacity building, there's a spiritual side of capacity building, and then there's a physical side of that as well. So we're going to be talking about, how do you start to kind of put a roadmap together that's relatively simple to walk and to follow, that speaks to some of the biggest challenges of our times. And my hope is you leave with both some kind of tangible takeaways and like things that you can actually go and implement. Maybe a couple little mindset shifts that are even helpful for you in this, because the mental part of this is huge. And then some thoughts on an actual pathway to move forward, whether you're coming here as an individual, a community, a business, and so on. So that's just kind of my thought on the intention for tonight. And our plan is to be approximately an hour and a half in there. So Charles and I are going to do a little bit of a talk, and then we're going to kind of tell you about an upcoming course that we have going on, which is actually going to be diving into this topic much deeper. And then if you can stick around to the end, we'll make sure we answer some questions at the end that are specific for that. So with all that said, though, I really want to start tonight off before I pass it to Charles with just bringing a little bit of gratitude in. And those of you that have done stuff with me before, you'll probably recognize this. It's something that I always kind of weave into my work and the way that I do this stuff. But particularly in the realm of talking about emergency and disasters, it feels so important to me, This topic can kind of be heavy. It can kind of bring up a little bit of anxiety in people sometimes. And it's so important to be grateful for the things that really are great in our lives. So I would invite everybody just to take a second to take a breath right now. Maybe even close your eyes just for a second. Let your body relax. I'm going to start talking a little bit slower. I was talking kind of fast there. And just tap into something you're feeling grateful for this morning. What are you feeling in this moment that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel good inside, that grounds you in a good way, and can hold you as we dive into some of these topics tonight that can be a little triggering? And in that, I'll share my gratitude. Maybe you want to even share your gratitude in the chat there. We can just kind of pull our minds together in a good way there. But there's a few things that come for me right now. One thing I'm really grateful for is actually the amazing network of people and communities I'm connected to. And through my work, I get to travel and be in a lot of different communities. And there really is, amongst all the bad news that we're hearing these days and all the things happening in the news, I feel this energy and the spirit rising as I go from organization to organization, community to community to community. And I'm so grateful for that. And when I think about the history of the lands where I live, I'm in an area today that's called Ontario, Canada, a little region called Muskoka. But I actually live on a lake, and the Anishinaabe name for the lake. So the Anishinaabe being one of the major groups of people from this land. And Anishinaabe is like a nation. I mean, there's many, many different groups, and some of them quite distinct within the Anishinaabe nation from my understanding of it. But the language, Anishinaabe-Moan Ojibwe, the name of this particular area is Neengetawayamog, the lake that I'm on. The English name for it is Lake of Bays, but that's the traditional lake here. But when I think about this region, if you go back, 1,000 years, we have this land that's been tended by the indigenous peoples of these lands. And then we have this period in time where that land was almost turned into desert and wasteland. Where literally people were rounded up and pushed onto reserves. A lot of hurt was done both to the land and the people. There was wars. There was all this crazy stuff that happened. And here we are on the other side of it. And although we're still kind of in a messy spot right now, there's a lot of healing to do. Beavers were almost extinct where I live right now. Elk were extinct at one time. The elk are actually coming back. The turkey are coming back. There's more beaver here now than there were 100 years ago. The waters in some of the lakes are actually cleaner now than they were 30 years ago. So there are some really beautiful things happening here. And I'm gifted to actually work in a few First Nations communities around here, specifically Anishinaabe communities, and the spirit rising in those communities and the work that they're doing. And I think about the fact, the land was damaged or almost attacked, and so were the people. And yet they persevered and they've come through and they're rising again. And that gives me hope. It gives me faith. It inspires me in these times. So all of that is kind of a roundabout way to just share gratitude for the land and the resiliency in the land and the resiliency in the people. And a gratitude for all those people that hold those old pieces that help carry us into the new and into the future. We don't necessarily know what's around the next corner. We know that the future is not going to look anything like the past. the next 10 years is not going to look like the last 10 years. And, some of that old wisdom may not manifest in the same way in the future that it did in the past, but there's still wisdom in it. So I'm thankful for the people that hold those pieces as we move forward into unknown times. So that's my gratitude this morning. And I'm going to pass it over to Charles to, to kind of, I'm just going to pass it over to Charles. I don't even need to say anything else on that.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for gratitude. So I wanted to start off, when we think about why emergency plans might fail, like why they might be challenged. I was, looking back at a lot of the organizations and communities I've been part of and a lot of the spaces I've been in, like why their plans don't implement. And one of the things that I realized is they didn't implement their plans very well is because they're busy. And there are other things that had pressure. And as I've been listening to friends around me and the news and the radio and all this, there's a lot of folks been talking about their New Year's resolutions. Does anybody here have? You don't have to tell us what they are, but like, does anybody here have a New Year's resolution? Like, made one? It's a common thing this time of year to be like, okay, so this year I'm gonna get better at this. And those resolutions are often about self-care. They're about like, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do something to help take care of myself. And self-care is really pivotal to a lot of the communities that I'm part of. There's a desire to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're healthy and eat well and exercise and do what we need, but also be able to say, oh, sometimes I need to step back, and that it's okay to step back and, take care of myself. It's not always about like taking care of others. Is, this conversation of self-care. I do believe there's a part of self-care that is around how do we tend our great gifts and our talents in the world. And you think about what you're good at, like what do you do, what gift have you been given? Like some people are great singers, some people are great artists, some people are mechanically inclined, and like to be able to offer that gift out to the world. So I think of self-care more than just like bubble baths, but I think they also are about tending our gifts and skills. But I also think self-care is this other piece, and that's around doing the things that take care of ourselves in meaningful ways. Like, I was driving the other day and I saw somebody on their cell phone, like driving along. And like, I think self-care is like when you pull over, you're like, I'm actually going to focus on this. Like, so when we talk about self-care and when we think about the community care, what are the things we do to demonstrate the care we have for others? And how does that relate to our emergency plans? Like, if we have a plan, if we have an emergency plan, are we ready to institute it? Have we tended that? Because I think it's part of care. So I'm going to switch off my speaker view where I'm a big, let's see if I can see other people here. Into our gallery view here. And I just want to ask you all, in your communities, I'm curious about what are some of the ways that you can demonstrate community care? What are some of the things that you can do to show like, oh, here is something I can do to help my community. And community can be a family. It can be an organization. It could be your workplace. It could be your friend network. But what are some of the things that we can do to show our care that isn't about retreating back, but about like using our gifts and skills to make things better? Yeah. Sheila.
So I often remind people to breathe, or I actually do something that makes them laugh. Or when I go to like a pharmacy or a doctor's office or whatever, I start singing when I'm there. And it's amazing because people just, you can hear a deep breath and you can hear a relax and you can hear, and I look for cackles of the day and I like the things that make you laugh. And they can be an honest to God cackle or they can be just a little, kind of thing. Because those endorphins do amazing things for our bodies. And just 30 seconds of stop running and listen to a bird or something is major.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. getting folks to laugh, like that is a huge one. If this is one of your gifts and skills, is to like bring kind of lightness and levity and all that comes with that, sure. But we've got some other great things that are coming in the chat. I saw ice patrols. I saw intention for monthly gatherings around mutual aid and solidarity. So yeah, so doing that, like that, oh, we're going to get together. Like I'm actually going to do that, practice that part of my plan versus being like, oh yeah, someday we'll get to that. Like someday we'll do that. But actually like, oh yeah, we're going to, because it's part of caring for our community, like actually getting to it. We got our creating safe space where a community can gather together. Yeah. And building relationships. So creating those spaces, and not just in your plan being like, we'll create safe space for others when emergency happens. Like, oh no, we're gonna practice that by creating them and engaging with them along our year as if it's part of our daily life, right? Let's see. Try to connect people to each others and organizations. Yeah, connected, like, and actually doing that. Like, oh, we're actually we're gonna come together. Because it's what we practice is what we do. Like if we don't practice it, it's hard to implement in a crisis. It's like building a muscle. Like so if this is going to be, a part of our kind of community care, our self-care, like we don't just exercise once a year, be like, yep, I'm going to exercise and be healthy. And I do it once a year. And then like, that's good. I know how I can do it next time. But like, no, you want to do it over and over. So, sharing polarity therapy, confessions of Joshua Tree March, 26th or 29th to the America's Polarity Therapy Association. Yeah. So doing these things, all these things that we have that we're putting in the chat. Anybody else want to offer anything verbally? Some of the things that they like are doing to show community care? You can either just unmute or raise your hand.
Yeah, I was trying to type fast, but I'll just jump in here. I know in our community, a lot of I'm from a First Nations, and a lot of our programs, we're as frontline workers, we're really supporting community and families and elders, and we do it because we love it. But something that I really strive for with our frontline workers is that to ensure that we're taking time to learn ourselves. So from our knowledge holders, because so often we're putting on programming for others, and it's like we're so busy that we don't get to do it ourselves. So I work at a school as well, so it's like setting up things for our teachers. So like we did black ash basket making, because so often you're with the kids, right? And you're learning and you're doing that. It's like, no, we just need time to just sit and do. And I find, I don't know if everybody else finds this, but we are created beings. And so I believe when we do something creative, it just fuels us. And I just find it just reinvigorates our spirit to continue on doing good in the world. So that's something that I really strive for and push for in our community. And I've seen a huge benefit for our employees and our staff here. So.
Yeah, I love that, Dee. Thank you. I love especially the part around taking time to do those things that we can value enough to teach others. Like, oh yeah, this is valuable. We want to make sure everybody knows how to do it, but like taking time to actually do that kind of self-work and allow us to enjoy the thing. Maybe, those things that we love, like, oh, I love doing that, but I don't get to do it very much. I do a little bit to make sure other people know how, but I don't, I'm always doing the other thing. Like, oh, practice those things we love and keep our communities and our cultures alive. So I love that. That's great. Yeah, so many good things in the chat. So I just wanted to bring up to kind of preface this conversation with the understanding that we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. And that self-care is really important. We need to do what we need to do so that we are not in crisis when crisis occurs. And I think by extension, we need to do what we can so our communities are not in crisis when crisis occurs. Like if our communities are healthy and we have tended them well, and our organizations are healthy and we've tended them well when a crisis happens, we don't need to be rescued. We have something we can offer. And how do we do that self-tending? How do we do that community tending, and not back burner it? I think that's one of the reasons some of our emergency plans fail. They become a binder that we put on a shelf, but we're not practicing. We're not living that thing that's going to keep us healthy and well. So, sort of bring that in. I see the chat is going faster than I can read it. So I'm going to pass this over to Chris. I'm going to read a little bit more on what you all have to offer. Feel free to keep dropping things in the chat. Love to hear what people are working on.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. And I love that you brought that in. By the way, hey, Dee, nice to see you.
Hey, Chris.
By the way, love that you brought this in. And, you know, some people, hopefully most people understand what we're doing here, but some people might be like, what does this have to do with emergency preparedness? But it really, really does. And I'm going to tell kind of two stories to be a bridge here. And then I'm going to drop into a little bit more of kind of the tactical planning side that the name suggested tonight. But this piece is actually foundational. And I guess I'll start it by saying that way that, you know, people and relationships are the foundations of plans. One of the reasons why plans fail is because the people fail at the base of them. And I use fail, I don't mean that in the harshest kind of word, but, you know, I'll give you an example for myself. You know, I have a pattern of keeping myself very, very busy and just planning one thing that jumps into the next, that jumps into the next. And when everything is going well and my health is at its best, I can do it. And I almost thrive off of it. I get excited. I'm jumping from one thing to the next. But then if something comes up that's not part of that plan and goes off, or I have a bad day and then I fall a little bit behind, and then you're a little bit more behind, and then suddenly you're struggling to keep up, and suddenly your health is declining and you're not getting a little slip, and all of this stuff starts to compound. And then that compounding either creates an emergency that wouldn't have created if you were in a better shape, or if an emergency actually happens and you're already run ragged, you're not at your best to actually be in service to your community right now or in service to yourself. So I say this all to say that, you know, actually being a little less busy in life and finding a little bit more time to tend ourselves and tend relationships is actually essential, because we can have the best written plan. We can do all kinds of training. You know, you can attend workshops like this, you can attend courses. And if you don't have the physical capacity, if you don't have the mental capacity, the spiritual capacity, when the rubber hits the road, as they sometimes say, that plan and that training may not actually be of any value in that moment for you. So we started off this way very intentionally tonight to say that that is actually a foundational part of this. And I just wanted to remind people that before we dive into the actual kind of more tactical side of this planning. And it makes me think about one other story I'll tell really, really quick. But I had a fun gig a number of years ago where a provincial hydro company actually hired me to come in and do a training for their staff team. And the essence of the training is I came in and I was actually teaching personal emergency preparedness for hydro workers. And I thought this was so insightful, because here you have these people that are responsible for holding up the electrical grid and infrastructure that keep millions of people safe. And the premises that the hydro company had is, you know what, if we have a really big disaster and our hydro workers are worried that their families aren't safe, they're probably not going to come to work and show up to try and keep the millions of other people safe. And we really need those people to show up at work. So they actually hired me to come in and work with their employees to make sure that their employees were doing self-care, that their employees actually had plans in place for their family, so that if something big happened up, they would actually be like, you know what, my family is okay. We thought ahead. We've put them in a good place. I can actually show up and help fix the electrical grid now. And now keep the hospitals running, you know, keep heat coming to the seniors' home and all those different things. So again, you know, that story of hydro, we're literally talking, about a utility company doing self-care for their employees as part of their emergency planning process. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that one and say that, you know, again, if we don't keep people healthy and build that capacity, plans fail. The other one is if we don't tend relationships and put time. Charles used that quote a second ago. Keeping communities and culture alive is actually essential to being able to respond. Because at the end of the day, here, I'm going to tell you a secret a little bit early. I wasn't supposed to say this until later in the presentation. Plans almost always fail in emergency preparedness. And I don't mean fail. Plans are super, super valuable. But the plan, as it's written out on paper, rarely works that way. When we make emergency plans, we don't actually expect them to work in the way that we've written them out on paper. What actually makes them work is the planning process, the people and their personal capacity to show up, and the relationships that they have. And that's relationship with other people. It's relationship with the land. It's relationship maybe with their purpose in life and their spiritual path. This is actually the foundation to this, and why I kind of use this word holistic emergency preparedness. So let's kind of dive into this topic a little bit, because I would like to, we're a little bit zoomed out right now, and I would like to kind of dive into some, well, actually, I won't say it quite like that, because this is actually very tangible. It's applicable in the present now. So that is a tangible takeaway. But let's get a little bit more into, let's say, the tactical side of it. And I've got a bit of a presentation I'd like to walk you through. So I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm going to hit play here. So first off, I've been working on this model for kind of for a decade right now, and it kind of weaves together these different components. So first off, you know, from my work in modern emergency and disaster preparedness, there's some really good tools and there's some really good tactics in there. You know, systems for emergency communications and stuff, you know, systems for organizing people, frameworks for how do we even approach this overwhelming topic of disasters. There's some really, really great frameworks that modern EM provides. But it's only one small piece of this puzzle that I would call like resiliency, right? Because we already talked about the community and people piece. The other one that's big in there is like nature, you know, the ecology that actually holds us. And this is a huge one. You know, if you look at a ton of big disasters that have happened in recent time, you know, I always think back to that massive flood that happened in Texas a number of years ago. I think it might have been Hurricane Harvey. Maybe I'm mixing up the name. But if you can remember back to Hurricane Harvey, there's a pretty good argument that if Texas had more of their native wetlands in place, that flood would not have been nearly as disastrous, right? And I'm not saying the flood wouldn't have happened. I am saying the impact of the flood would have potentially been significantly less if there was more native ecology in place in that habitat, right? So there are a lot of modern disasters that happen that are actually a consequence of human design. And that's where this idea of actually working with nature and this permaculture regenerative design lens become really important. And I feel really strongly that if we start to weave, you know, this regenerative design, working with nature, the best of modern emergency management, and be realistic about tending relationships with community and people, this is a really potent skill set in what feels like a very potent time where we don't really know what's around the next corner. So I'm going to share, I'm going to kind of walk you through the process that I kind of work with when organizations hire me to kind of come in to work with them, or communities hire me to come in and work with them when we're talking about this topic. So let's start with the idea of why plans play in the first place. And maybe I should even just back up for 1 minute, because a good question would be asked, you know, what do you even mean by plans in the first place, right? A plan could be as simple as, you know, we've had some actually, a plan could be as simple as I have some ideas in my head around what I think might happen in the future and what I might do about that. That's a plan right there, you know, some ideas in my head about the future and what I might do about it. The next layer of that plan might be, oh, you know, I've sat down with my significant other or my family or my household or my friends or my work team. You know, maybe we've made a safety and planning committee at work, or maybe we run an event and we have a safety committee for the event. And we've actually now taken what was in our head and we've verbalized it. Maybe we've even gone as far as writing that plan down on a piece of paper. In the world of business, we actually have a term called BCP, business continuity planning. So a business continuity plan is the idea that your business has actually come up with a plan of how your business would respond if there is a hazard or an emergency. And that hazard or emergency could be like, you know, an earthquake comes and it just rattles the whole town. It could be that your organization gets struck by a cyber attack and loses access to your computers. It could be that somebody gets hurt or one of your clients gets hurt. It could be that you don't have enough money to pay your bills and you're at risk of going bankrupt, right? So as a business, all of those things would constitute as an emergency. And having a BCP, a business continuity plan, basically, how do we have continuity of operations? How do we keep serving our vision in the world as a business if one of these emergencies come up? Now, we can have a continuity plan, though, for our organization. We can have it for our community. We can have it for our household or our family or our block, right? So when I say emergency plan, you don't have to think about this big, complex paper book. That's actually not what we're talking about. Although what I'm going to show you tonight is a model, if you want to go that way, which I think there's value in, to turn it from a big, thick book until actually a really thin book that's actually really simple to follow. And there's some layers that we want to weave on top of that that actually make that plan much more likely to be supportive as we adapt to the changes of our times, the changes of our climate, and emergencies and disasters as they come up. But let's talk about why plans fail in the first place. The first one, a lot of people just don't have a plan in the first place. And there can be a lot of real reasons for this. You know, for some people, there's a fear and a grief to even look at this stuff. And what I would say to folks that kind of fall into that category is, you know, the opposite end of that spectrum, fear and grief, to look at it, sure, that it might cause triggers and bring up these things. But then what happens when the event actually happens and is inevitable? Now you're in an even worse place. I live in the world of disasters and emergencies all the time. I'm talking about it almost every day. And people ask, Chris, how do you sleep at night when you're looking at worst case scenarios? And I sleep at night because I'm actually doing things about it. I'm being proactive. I'm building relationships. I'm building capacity. That actually gives me confidence. It makes me feel empowered. And it actually allows me to sleep really good at night. I've developed a relationship with risk. I've developed a relationship with the unknown. And it's a healthy relationship that allows me to live in a world where there's a lot of risk and a lot of unknowns, and be able to do it in a way that I generally sleep really well at night, right? So that's one component. The other one here is often ignorance. Like there are people that just don't think it can happen to them until it does. And that's a scary one, you know? I always think back to a number of years, I mean, this happens all the time, but a number of years ago, there was that big tsunami that happened over in Indonesia. And I mean, a massive impact for the local people that were over there, and probably caught a lot of them off guard. But I'm referencing it right now. Imagining you being a tourist that was going away with your family with your swim shorts on vacation, and all of a sudden this tsunami comes through and wipes everything out. How many of those tourists even considered the possibility that they might fly to another country, not have any of the resources of their home or their community, and be in a disaster like that, right? It's ignorance. Like we don't know until it actually happens, right? And people find themselves in those scenarios all the time. And then of course, the last one is time. And I think maybe part of the issue here is that we've often either don't know how to do emergency planning, or what we've been taught is way too complex and overwhelming, and we don't know where to start. And if we simplify it, then we can actually have less time put into it and still take really effective steps that are helpful. And hopefully with this process today, you're going to see how we can leverage the limited time that we do have to actually get us the best results. So that's one reason, probably one of the biggest reasons, is so many people, so many businesses, so many organizations, so many events just don't have a plan in the first place. And usually they realize they should have had a plan after something happens that shows them they should have had a plan. And sometimes they don't make it through that event, right? That's actually the end of things. So there's reason number one. Reason number two, and this is actually a big one, I see this a lot, is kind of ego and overconfidence. And I'll connect it to this next one here. I love this saying, we don't know what we don't know. I've been living in this realm for almost 2 decades now, thinking about it all the time. And I still have a ton of blind spots. Things come up all the time in my work that I didn't foresee happening, right? And it's happened enough that I'm highly aware that I don't know what I don't know. Sometimes in context of emergency disasters, people aren't aware that they don't know what they don't know. And that's actually scary, right? So this overconfidence that like, oh, you know, I'm super confident. I have all these skills. Like I would be fine. I consider that actually a liability. I really encourage humble confidence. Overconfidence is a liability. Humble confidence is a strength, in my opinion. And that's what I want to kind of gear people towards in the work that I do right now. But ego and overconfidence often leads to very big blind spots that when they come through can cause a lot of problems really fast. That also dovetails really well into this next one, is a lot of plans just have too many assumptions built into them around, you know, what is going to happen, how it's going to play out, when is it going to happen, where is it going to happen? And at the end of the day is we don't really know any of this stuff, right? All we can do is use the best of our brains and our collective brains and past experience to kind of do some projecting into the future. That's very, very helpful. But at the end of the day, there are endless variables. And that's why most emergency plans fail, because there's too many variables to plan for them all. I'm going to say that again. There are too many variables to plan for every variable. So when we make a plan, we actually have to know that the plan has blind spots. This is actually really important, right? But if we know the plan has blind spots, we don't have overconfidence. We actually have confident humility. And now we can develop capacity within ourselves, within our systems, within our organization, within our community, that actually allow us to adapt and face those blind spots confidently when they come up. Again, this is why the mental side of this is really important, right? And then, actually, I'll share one other really quick story on that one too. I have a great example from the other day. Well, not the other day. This is a couple of years ago. I posted this video on communicating with emergency radios in a disaster. And it's funny, I got a comment on YouTube, and I don't think too much about YouTube comments. Everyone's got their opinion these days. But literally, this guy writes on my YouTube video, this video, something to the nature of like, this video is ridiculous. YouTube, your radios will be no good when the whole energy grid has been destroyed by an EMP. And I was like, okay, you're talking about one very specific scenario. Yes, if there is so if you don't know what an EMP is, it's an electromagnetical pulse. So the sun can create these electromagnetical pulses. If one was big enough, it could actually damage infrastructure here on Earth. This actually has happened before. If you're not familiar with that, you could actually look up the Clarington event. You can do an internet search, the Clarington event, and it was basically a solar flare that actually damaged electrical transformers down here on Earth. I forget what the year it was. It was quite a long time ago. So it is absolutely possible for an EMP to come from the natural world. EMPs have also been developed as war tools. Literally, there are EMP bombs where a nation could send an EMP at another nation and use it to take out their electrical infrastructure. Anyways, without going down that rabbit hole, the essence of this is, this person said, oh, what are you doing wasting your time on radios? An EMP would render them useless. And my response was pretty simple. I'm like, yes, an EMP would render that useless. But what about the 10,000 other scenarios where they'd be very helpful that are actually very likely to happen? And ironically, that was several years ago I got that comment. I've used my radio many times since then. It's been very helpful, and the EMP has never happened and might not ever happen in my lifetime. And yes, I know that if it happened, that radio would be no good. I have that built in my plan. There is a thing that could take out my radio, and I have a plan B for that, right? But this is just the idea that if we have too many assumptions around what it's going to look like, how it's going to play out, there's a good chance we're actually going to be wrong about some of those assumptions. Being wrong is not a weakness if we know that it's an assumption and that we might be wrong, and we develop capacity to adapt if we are wrong, right? And then the last one here, this is really big, and this kind of leads into what we're going to do kind of the rest of this class today, is if your plan is a paper plan, a lot of traditional emergency plans are these very thick books that collect dust in a desk. Now they're digital files on computers that no one ever really looks at. And if a disaster happens and you pull it out, you'd be like, oh my goodness, this is way too much paper to read through and figure out what to do when my heart is going a mile a minute and 10 different people are trying to get my attention right now. A big, thick paper plan is not what we need when the rubber hits the road. We actually want a very simple plan that with capacities developed to support that plan. So that's where we're going to kind of transition to right now. So within what I call holistic emergency preparedness, we want to think about the different areas that we actually want to build capacity in. One component of that is actually mental capacity, right? And we could really, we could do several sessions just on developing mental capacity. And I'll tell you a really great story from personal experience. This is jumping back a number of years ago. I was actually attending an event, and I was kind of an unofficial volunteer. It was basically like a street market and festival. This was a huge learning lesson for me, and hopefully some of you will maybe have a little bit of a light bulb moment in this, or just, I hope you find a little bit of value in this story. So imagine we're at this event, and all of a sudden the sky just turns the darkest blue-gray color, and we know that we're about to get slammed by a storm. There's all these vendors set up, all this stuff going around, and we're kind of scrambling to basically lock the place down as fast as we can and get ready for it. This event did not have an emergency plan. I happened to show up at it as an emergency planner that day. So now I've kind of thrown myself into this role where I'm trying to weave in a bunch of these things really, really fast. And I'm a little bit scrambled in my brain because I'm trying to do too much at once when I recognize kind of the lack of plan or preparedness for this event. If we had a plan ahead of time, we would have bought ourselves some time, and it would have been a lot easy just to kind of get things in place really quickly there. But the story that's really neat from the mental capacity place is I had a big learning that day around my own brain and how it works. So lightning hits an electrical pole. The electrical pole literally catches on fire. There's this crazy wind blowing, and a whole bunch of tents go flying, and one of them wraps around this other pole. And I had this moment where I just ran to this tent that had wrapped around the pole, and everybody's kind of scrambling at this point, and I'm literally trying to unweave this tent off of this pole. Why the heck during a lightning storm where we're thinking about people's safety and there's literally a fire over there, am I thinking about a broken tent wrapped around a pole? I went into that fight, flight, freeze response. And I actually went into the fight response. I wanted to do something, but my nervous system got so overwhelmed. I actually slipped into that limbic part of my brain, the fight, flight, fight response. And I actually started doing something that didn't make sense and was actually dangerous. Now, fortunately, I did not find myself there for too long. I kind of was doing it for I don't know how long. And then all of a sudden I was just like, this makes no sense. What are you doing? You need to actually breathe right now. And I'm going to do that right now because I'm finding myself talking quick. Those of you that know me also know that I get excited about this stuff. I get talking quick. So one of the things that I need and continue to work on in my own mental capacity building is actually the ability to take a deep breath under stress. Breathing techniques to actually slow the nervous system down so that I have a ton of training. I have a ton of knowledge. But if my limbic system kicks into fight, flight, freeze, if my heart rate gets up past a certain heart rate, that training actually falls apart. All the rational planning experience I have starts to fall apart, and I end up grabbing and focusing on the wrong thing. So building mental capacity is actually training our nervous system to be able to function when there's some uncertainty around us and we need to act fast. And there's a lot more to it than that. But just to start us off there, this is actually a huge component, right? So from a business perspective, from an organizational perspective, and this is why we started tonight with Charles' piece, we want to think about mental capacity building amongst our staff team or our family team or our community. You know, how do we support a mental tool set that allows us to perform performs the wrong word, but allows us to do what needs to be done in these situations. I won't touch a lot on this one. And when I say spiritual capacity, I mean this in a very specific way. I'm not talking about this in a religious context tonight, although I do believe that, you know, having a religious relationship or connection can actually really support your mental and physical capacity if it's held in a healthy way. And that's kind of what I'm speaking to right now. When I say spiritual in this capacity, I actually mean like purpose beyond self. Tapped into like, who am I? What is my purpose in this world? What am I meant to do? What am I capable of? There's an overlap between the mental and spiritual in the way that I'm using it right now, but that's actually really, really valuable, you know? One of the things that I've been doing in a lot of my work these days, when we talk about the changing world, the changing climate, all of these kind of scary things going around with people, I think it's actually important to start exploring our own story in relationship to uncertainty, in relationship to changing times, you know? What is my story about that? What is my purpose within that? Because myself, I actually have a very empowering story around this. You know, I have a purpose that I see myself in. So I'm a little less likely to get overwhelmed or feel defeated or stick my head into the sand because it's part of my purpose to actually step up to the challenges of our time and to try and do that in a healthy way. So there's this mental piece, there's this spiritual piece. And then the last one on here, of course, is physical capacity building. And this is a lot of what we're going to be doing in, actually, the upcoming course that we're running is going to touch on all of these capacities. Actually, all of them quite a bit. But physical capacity building is the more traditional, like, okay, building the physical capacities. Do our staff team or our family members have the training, you know? A great example right here. There's an organization that I worked with. And sorry, this was an organization, this is a different course. There was a family that I was working with. And one of the family members was telling me how they, for Christmas a couple of years ago, went and bought two-way walkie-talkies or two-way radios for a bunch of their family members as part of their emergency plan. And she gave them out at Christmas and they all put them in their emergency kits. The person was completely unaware that those radios, they live too far away from each other for those radios to actually work. Two-way radios, generally the ones that you would buy from like a sports store, they actually have a very short range. You know, often you're actually talking about just talking to somebody kind of up the street or a couple blocks away. You're not talking about talking to somebody in the next neighborhood over. Throw buildings in there, throw hills in there, throw trees in there. Suddenly their range goes way down. On top of that, there's actually quite a skill set to being able to talk effectively on a radio when your heart rate's going and there's a lot of variables, especially if multiple people are trying to use the radios at the same time, right? So they had a physical piece of gear, a radio, which in theory you would think would make their emergency plan more strong. But honestly, there's actually a decent chance that that would have taken away from their ability because they would have been focused, kind of like I was focused on the tent that had wrapped around the pole. They're focused on trying to make a radio work that's actually not going to work because they haven't developed capacity around that radio, right? So we want to think about our physical capabilities. So we want to think about, the actual plans that we're putting in place. What are the systems that we're going to design? What is the gear that we're going to acquire? And then how do we actually use those different things? A great model, this actually comes from, oh, it's funny, that slide was out of place. Let me just group myself here. Oh, that's funny. I knew something was a little off. My slides somehow got thrown off. I know what's happened. Okay, sorry about that, folks. A little bit there. So yeah, just to circle this back up here. So this is the roadmap and pathway that I would like to start mapping out to you, that I work with at least, and that I've found to be really effective. I've applied this on a personal level with my family and my community, and every year we're trying to add new layers to that and strengthen it. I also do this with businesses. I've done it with events. I've done it with schools. I've done it with farms, quite a different organizations. And this process, here's a great example of something taken kind of from modern EM. This is literally taken right from FEMA. And it's called the disaster preparedness cycle. So we start this cycle off with doing an evaluation, right? And we want to evaluate, okay, well, what resources do we actually have in the first place available to us? What is our current capacity? What are our blind spots? What is the infrastructure that we rely on? What are the hazards that could potentially render that infrastructure unavailable to us, right? So we start to think of, okay, here's a hazard, here's an infrastructure. How would that hazard impact this infrastructure? Like my phone line, like my running water system, right? All of the different things that we might rely on. So we do this large scale kind of evaluation. Once we've done the evaluation, we start doing some planning, right? And it could be planning in your head, but I actually recommend taking that a bit further and planning with other people and putting some of it down on paper. And I have a good process that I go through on how to put plans down on paper. Once we've put down plans on paper and the different components, then we need to kind of organize the things that actually allow that plan to take place. And this is often the miss. A lot of, municipalities, for an example, they will come up, like in Canada, by law, every municipality has to have an emergency plan, right? It's a regulatory process. But a lot of municipalities will make the plan. If they don't follow up and actually organize the people and equipment next, though, when the disaster happens, that plan isn't good, right? Because you need to now say, okay, in this plan, we said we need two-way radios. We said we need backup water filtration if the water gets contaminated. We need backup power. We need whatever that is, right? So we need to now organize the equipment and the gear we need. And then we need to organize the people that are going to tend the gear and organize the gear. The next layer to that, though, is now we need to actually know how to use that, which where training comes in, right? So we're going to train on. So now the plan was, actually, let me do it for this girl's example here. So she evaluated that what would happen if the phones went down. I would not be able to get a hold of my family. Okay, I'm going to make a plan. I think we should have radios. I'm going to organize. I go get the radios and I give them to people. But she stopped there. She didn't use the train component. She never actually taught people how to use them. And when we start to train things, this is where this slide comes in. We need to actually test our plans, right? And when we start to actually test the plans through training, through exercises, we realize what our capabilities are. We realize the strengths in our capabilities. We also realize the weaknesses in our capabilities. And if we see the weakness in the capability, we're able to actually make a plan to improve that capability over time, right? The other thing testing does is assumptions. So in this radio scenario, this girl had an assumption that the radios would be able to reach her family members. The assumption was actually wrong, right? If she had actually done a test or a training around the radios, they would have figured that out. Now they've exposed a blind spot. Suddenly the blind spot is not a liability. It's actually building capacity instead of hurting capacity, right? Blind spot is not a bad thing. We all have blind spots. I have tons of blind spots. What we want to have is an awareness that we have blind spots. We don't know what we don't know. And then we do things to try and expose our blind spots. So then we can turn that blind spot into a capacity building opportunity instead of a liability, right? So assumptions is a big one here. We need to test the gear itself. Does the gear actually work? Does it hold up under stress or does it just fall apart, right? We might put systems in place. How would we respond if this happened, right? How would we communicate amongst people? How would we put the fire out? Whatever it is. So we put all these systems in place, but the system is just in theory. If we don't actually test the theory, we're not going to see where the holes are, right? And have the opportunity to turn a liability into a capacity. We also need to test the people. How do people actually show up, right? We can learn a lot about ourselves. You may have a business or an event where you have a couple people in different roles. And then, and I've seen this running emergency exercises. So an emergency exercise is when an organization hires me to come in and we actually run a mock disaster. I've done this with hospitals. I've done this with municipalities, where we basically create a fictitious scenario and we run it through with a bunch of the people there. So the people fall into their roles and they get to test the systems and the gear. And inevitably, a whole bunch of challenges show up, which is a good thing. We want challenges to show up when we do the exercise because this is how we turn liability into capacity, right? So anyways, when we start to think about people in this context, though, maybe Charles started with this. All of us have gifts. Every single person on this call has a gift. Your gift might not be the person at the front of the room that's able to take in all of this information and delegate. You might just fall apart in that. That's actually okay. You might be really good at holding down one of those pieces that actually needs to be done. That's just as important as the person that's telling people what to do, right? That person telling people what to do, they might be really good at taking in a lot of information and making a plan in their head under changing variables. That's a real gift. There's actually, I would argue, very few people that are really, truly gifted in that area to take in a lot of information, to take in all the unknowns and instantly turn it into an action plan and then adapt on the fly. That's a very unique skill set. Having those people within your community, your organization, your family, your business is a real gift. But it's no more of a gift than the person that can actually hold any one of those roles really well. Because the person that can delegate really well and see the big picture might actually not be good at, let's say, working with people on the ground. Might not be good at the person that's having an anxiety attack and needs to be calmed down. Might not know how to run the generator or fix the generator, right? So knowing your own gift is really, really valuable, or what gifts you bring in context to disaster. Knowing what gifts your community members or your business team members or your event members have. And under an exercise, gifts start to show up and the parts that were less gifted didn't show up. And maybe we have a plan where, hey, this person is going to hold this role, this person's going to hold this role, this person's going to hold this role. We run an exercise and we think, you know what? I'm not the best person to hold this role. I thought I was. I had an assumption that I'd be good at this, but when we ran the exercise, I wasn't that good. And I saw that, Charles over there, Charles, you would actually do a better job at this than I would. And I could absolutely do what you're doing. Could we swap roles? And now we've planned this ahead of time. And when I think back to the event where I told the story, this community market, where the storm came in and the fire and all that kind of stuff, just having some pre-designated roles where our team knew we tended our relationships, like we talked about at the beginning. We know each other, we know each other's gifts, and we know where each other maybe don't show up at our best or where our gifts struggle. That's so helpful in creating a container to now hold this event in a safer way. Now get rid of the assumptions by actually having some conversations around this, maybe even put some of it on paper, maybe get some gear and stuff. Suddenly, wow, we're starting to get a robust container here that can actually, and if something shows up that was part of our plan, we're going to be on it and dial it. But if something shows up that wasn't part of our plan, well, now we have capacity to adapt to something we haven't seen before, to adapt to the unknown, because we have all these different pieces in place. And this last one is big, performance under stress and changing variables. I can't stress that as much. When we run exercises, when we induce a little bit of stress, we need to now train ourselves. How do we perform under stress? Do I remember to stop and breathe when I start to get a little bit overwhelmed? Can I catch myself in that moment, right? Do I remember that last time we did this exercise, I got really worked up and I started barking orders at people really, really fast. And I started talking too fast. Chris, you're talking too fast. Breath. Yes, we need to act fast right now in this emergency. But if I talk too fast, people might not digest it. Oh, I'm going to take a breath. Yes, we need to act fast, but we also need to act decisively and clear. So I'm going to talk a little bit slower right now. And slower is actually going to get us where we need to be faster. And I'm constantly working on slowing myself down a little bit, taking that breath as part of my nervous system response to stimulus and stress, which is very much a part of self-care. It's actually better for my body. It releases tension in my body, which is actually better for preventing disease and having vitality. And it's very effective if I feel that heart rate go up in a real emergency to have actually practiced stopping, taking the breath, slowing down. So combine personal capacity with relationships to people, with actual systems, with actual gear that we've trained on, with being real that we have assumptions and we have blind spots, and then developing capabilities. This is that holistic preparedness map that I'm talking. So the good news here is that plans don't need to be complicated. In fact, they actually should not be complicated, because a very thick plan is probably not going to be something you're going to look at when the rubber hits the road. What we want is a very simple, straightforward plan, and then to develop capacity amongst our team that is going to be carrying out the plan. And some planning, though, is really, really helpful. So just to kind of reiterate some of the tools that we have, we've talked about mental and spiritual capacity building. We've talked about physical capacity building and how this should be a simple process. So there's the disaster planning cycle, right? We assess, we plan, we organize, we do some training. And training is a little bit different than an exercise. Training is like, I'm going to learn how to use this walkie-talkie. An exercise is like, we're going to create a scenario where I'm using this walkie-talkie in a situation with multiple different changing variables and a little bit of stress. And I need to now use this walkie-talkie under stress in an unknown situation. And that in turn allows me to track my personal capacity, my nervous system, and expose those blind spots. And then the cycle starts over. Okay, we debrief it and we go back to the planning cycle, right? So one of the tool sets you have coming out of this is the awareness of breathing, heart rate, the limbic system, and the need for mental capacity building. And one of the tool sets is this thought about spiritual capacity building. You know, what is my personal story? What is my mythology in context to our changing world, in context to climate change, and my role in my community, my business as it relates to that? You have the disaster planning as a repeatable cycle you can just go through indefinitely. As part of that disaster planning, the planning process, we will look at things like infrastructure. So, you know, what infrastructure do we rely on every day? You know, right now, I need electricity to speak to you folks. I need Wi-Fi connection. I need water to keep myself hydrated. That's all infrastructure, right? If I now look at what hazards could impact that, you know, an ice storm, an earthquake, what are the different things that could cut off the electricity, that could cut out my ability to get water? Then I can start to make a plan for what I would do if that happens. And that's the 4 pillars piece. Let me touch on these other 2. We assess the people. I talked about this a lot already, so I won't hit there. We also want to assess land, and I haven't touched on that one a lot tonight, but we want to put our plan in context to the geography and the habitat that we live in. This is the Texas example, you know, the lack of wetlands increasing the flood. So can we look at the greater habitat we live in, and can we work with that habitat? So we're not fighting against nature, because if we fight against nature, nature's going to win. Nature is so much more powerful than us, right? But if we work with nature, wow, that's a potent skill set. And I really believe that all of our ancestors had a potency and ability to work with nature in ways that most modern people don't even realize is possible today. And that's a whole nother story right there. So there's the assessment piece. Now, the next layer of the planning is what we call the 4 pillars. So once I've identified the hazards, the infrastructure, all these different pieces in the assessment, we start thinking about, okay, well, if I look at my hazard list, or if I look at the infrastructure I'm worried about taking out, you know, how can I prevent things from taking that infrastructure out in the first place? Can I prevent the hazard from happening? If I can't prevent it, well, how am I going to prepare for when it happens? And can I mitigate? And by mitigate, it means like reduce the impact of it. You know, so if I was governing Texas, I'd say, Texas, we need more wetlands to mitigate against the next flood. We're probably not going to stop the hurricane. We're probably not even going to stop the flood. But can we lessen how bad the flood is? Well, there's actually many things we can do that through regenerative and permaculture design in urban landscapes. And this is one of the things Earth Activist Training specializes in with their permaculture design course, the PDC, with their regenerative living program. It's all about how do we design landscapes that work and serve people and the planet simultaneously. The 2 other pillars are like, okay, well, if this happens, how are we going to respond? So that's like, okay, well, we're going to pull out our radios and we've tested them so we know how to do it. And then what are we going to put in place afterwards? And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, because you know, you think about all of these hurricanes in the States right now. There was that big one in Jamaica, right? Just a few weeks ago, we had that massive hurricane in Jamaica. It was all over the news. People were worried about people in Jamaica. People were fundraising, all these things. Most people are not thinking about Jamaica right now. All the people in Jamaica, they're still dealing with that disaster. It's very real for them right now, right? There's lots of secondary emergencies that happen after the hurricane, after the earthquake, after the pandemic. You could argue that some of the financial challenges that a lot of small businesses are facing right now, and maybe even some of the social dilemmas that people are facing right now, we're seeing this real rise in social unrest and social divide. The pandemic had an impact on that, right? I'm not saying what the impact was. I'm just saying the pandemic has had an impact on the social landscape and the financial landscape. Most people are not thinking a lot about COVID these days, yet we're still being impacted by COVID years later. So that's the recovery phase of emergency planning. And I think if we're more proactive thinking about the aftermath, we can set ourselves up to be in a much better place when we find ourselves in that aftermath, right? And then I talked about when we do training and exercising, this is when we start to really build some deep capacity. So I think I'm going to just pause there for a second. And where we're going to go here. So folks, I haven't been looking at the questions at all. We are going to do a question and answer period in a moment. I just wanted to open it up. I don't know if you want to comment on anything there, Charles, or if I missed anything, or if there's anything that was unclear or confusing. And then what we're going to do is I'd like to share a little bit about this upcoming training that we're running. I'm partnering with Earth Activist Training. I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. And then we'll basically open up the rest of the call for your specific questions related to this or other options. Anything you want to jump in there with, Charles, or should I just keep going?
No. I think you're doing great. When we get to questions and answers, we can engage with other stuff. Yeah.
All right. I was hoping you were going to talk longer so I could drink some more water, but that's all good.
I can talk some more.
I'm just joking. It's all good.
Yeah. No, drink. Do your self care. Do your self care. Drink some water because water is good for us.
Here, let's pull this back up. I did just some water there, and thank you for that. I actually should have drank water right there. I needed it. So
yeah, no, it's good to do. It's good to do.
Okay, folks. So yeah, we'll do some question and answers in just a few minutes here. But I did want to share about a next step there. Now, I know in tonight's call, yeah, this is such a big topic, right? And hopefully I've laid out a path where you can at least see a path there and you understand some of these core concepts around capacity building. For those that would actually like to have a community to support them in this and mentors to support them in this, we are running a 6-week online program that's starting this February. So it starts February 3rd, it runs to March 10th, and it's going to be on Tuesday afternoons. So it's running at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. And I believe this is actually the 3rd time, maybe even the 4th time we've run this class. And I really love this class. Because basically what we're going to do in this class, I've kind of laid out the roadmap that I work with. And in this class, I actually help you implement the roadmap, right? And walk you through. I mean, obviously, there's way more teachings in each one of those layers. And I kind of feel like one of my gifts, or at least what I'm trying to work on as one of my gifts, is being able to take this overwhelming, big process of creating a plan and actually simplifying it down into really clear, tangible steps that actually get results. So that's really my goal with this class, is to help you take, if you really thought like, okay, what Chris is sharing tonight, mental capacity building, spiritual capacity building, physical capacity building, built into a simple plan that is actually actionable. And we have a roadmap ahead for how we're going to make it actionable or what those actions are, short term, middle term, long term. If that speaks to you, then this course is what that is. This course is where we're going to do that as a group and with community support. It is priced in American dollars because I know we have some people international here. So it's $300 USD. And we also do have group rates available. And I believe there's a discount code just for the webinar folks tonight that's going to be kind of limited time. Probably, I don't know what the timeline is that. I'll let Charles speak to that in a second. But just to say a couple little highlights of this course, then maybe we'll take any questions about the course, and then we'll dive into just your general questions about emergency planning, tonight's talk, anything else that's coming up for you there. A couple highlights about this course. So what is it going to look like? We're going to do a couple sessions that are really focused on that mental capacity part. We're going to talk about breathing. We're going to talk about frameworks that we can use mentally when we feel overwhelmed and we need to make a decision fast. And there's a lot of variables and we don't have all the information that we need. That's a very real thing that happens all the time in disasters under stress. It's like we have a lot of information, almost too much to sort through. we don't have enough time and we don't have some of the information we need, and we need to act and make a decision anyways. That's a real thing. So we're going to talk a little bit, how do I develop the mental capacity to hold that and make an action and be adaptable as we go along? So there's going to be that component of it. And then we're going to dive into those different tools that I laid out for you. You know, I'm going to give you an emergency plan template, and we're going to do a hazard assessment for your unique scenario. We're going to look at the critical infrastructure that you rely on. We're going to look at your community and do some community mapping and talk about, you know, what capacities and strengths can I identify within my community, and where do I see some liabilities? And let's make a roadmap to turn liabilities into capacities, right? This course can be taken as an individual. You know, you could apply it to your family or block, but it's also really valuable for organizations, for businesses, for events, and does have a little bit of a spin around that. So if you are with an organization, you know, maybe you're a nonprofit, maybe you're a farm, an eco-village, maybe you're a private business, and you're thinking, you know, our business is a little bit worried about the economy right now. Our business is worried about climate change. Our business is worried about supply chains right now. Then this would absolutely be applicable to your business. So it's applicable to businesses, it's applicable to individuals and organizations, it's applicable to even events. You know, maybe you run a festival, maybe you run a market, maybe you run a school or a forest school. We're going to be basically taking the theory from tonight, but actually breaking it down into the small little micro steps. You're going to make the plan for this class. You're going to actually make a real working plan for your unique scenario. So that's kind of the goal of how we're going to do this tonight. And maybe I'll just share one more. Oh, actually, two more things I'm going to share. I'm going to pass it over to Charles. He'll let you know what the coupon code is, and then we'll go into a question period. So there are going to be a few fun special guests coming in as part of this. Starhawk, who some of you know, Earth Activist Training. Starhawk is going to be coming in one night, and she's going to be doing a session on fires and wildfires, so how to prepare our homes and our communities for wildfires. She's also going to be talking about this fascinating area we call trauma-informed response. Trauma-informed response is recognizing that people often fall into fight, flight, freeze scenario when they're put in a traumatic scenario or put under a lot of stress. And again, you can have a lot of great plans around how you would communicate or what needs to get done. But if the way you communicate actually triggers people's fight, flight, response freeze, the plan's probably not going to play out in a way that's helpful for you. Star has a ton of experience actually being on the ground in scenarios that have gone sideways or been very challenging. So she brings a lot of real world experience on that human level. How do we communicate amongst people? How do we organize amongst people that's trauma informed? Meaning we're taking into account the ability to trigger a nervous system response and trying to actually prevent or mitigate against putting people into that response so that people's capacities shine through and collectively we're able to actually do what we need to do. Lila Darwish is also going to be doing a guest presentation. I don't think it's going to be live this year, but she's actually doing a whole thing on bacterial and fungal remediation. So how to work with nature to actually heal. Oh, sorry, that's a different. I just crossed a thread there. I got excited. This is a course that Lila runs for EAT on bioremediation. Sorry, Lila is going to be sharing a little bit about organizing within communities and thinking about diverse needs. You know, it's one thing to think about, you know, all the healthy middle-aged folks with a lot of energy. But what about the people in your community that maybe in the seniors home, you know? What about people in the area of town that is under-resourced? You know, and all those, she's going to be weighing in some of those layers. Basically, how do we think about, you know, equity and diversity and working within communities to think about everybody's needs and working together collectively? And she brings a lot of real world experience to that as well. So these are some of the layers that we're going to be exploring in this. And I thought I'd share just one more little story before I pass it over to Charles here. So prior to COVID pandemic, I was already working in emergency preparedness. I had been for almost a decade already. And at the very first inklings that there was an outbreak overseas, I started thinking, I wonder what the ripple impact could be of this over the next couple of months and the next couple of years. And I sat down with my wife and we actually made a business continuity plan for both our businesses. And we actually anticipated, you know what, if this turns into something big, it might be hard to get certain supplies off the store. And this could actually have a major impact on the economy. We should probably start to pivot now so we're a little bit ahead if suddenly people aren't going out in public and they're afraid of going out in public. And interesting enough, you know, that was months before lockdown started happening. and things started not being available on the shelf. And when all that happened, I actually felt like, oh, wow, we're already really well set up for this. We're already thinking on to the next step of this at this point. So again, that's part of my goal for your business, your community, your family, is how do you always be a couple steps ahead of the unexpected instead of just like scrambling and facing everything in the moment. And when you're a couple of steps ahead, if something does curveball you or comes out of nowhere that you didn't see, you have a little more capacity to adapt to it. You have a bit more resilience. So ultimately, that's what this course is all about, helping you develop those different capacities. And tonight's class, hopefully, helped you think about those capacities a little bit differently and maybe gives you some thoughts. Even if you don't join us in this course, I really hope there's some takeaways from you from tonight. Charles, anything else you want to say about the course? And then why don't we do some questions and answers? I'm going to ask for kind of two phases here. Charles is going to say one more thing. I would love in the chat just to hear what's one or two things people took away from tonight. What's one or things that you can actually implement or use now from tonight? Because that really was my goal. Beyond whether you sign up for the course, I hope that there's something you're taking away. I would love to know what those are. Charles is going to share a couple more things, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A at the end there.
Yeah, I put in the chat the registration links for the upcoming emergency and disaster planning class. The discount code is E & DP. That's emergency and disaster planning 26. It's in the chat, so you should be able to find it there. That'll get you in if you're interested in joining. As we've said, there's a group rate, so we love people to come in groups because we often respond to disasters not as isolated individuals, but actually with a group or organization, whether it's our families or communities, workplace, whatever. So if you're coming in as a group, if it's under 5, there's kind of a fixed rate. But if you have more than 5 people, we'll work with you to get a rate that makes sense for your whole team. So get a hold of me at Charles Williams at Eat Activist. It's also in the chat .org, and we can figure out what works for you. We have other classes coming up that relate to this. We have advanced and basic permaculture classes that really talk about how do we design our spaces and places for resilience. We have a intro to the GIS mapping class, and if you're getting into like disaster planning, having good maps and figuring out how to visualize your areas sometimes can be very helpful. I'm doing in 2 weeks-ish, I'm doing a intro on a little pop-up on flood mapping. So if you live in an area when a flood and you want to figure out how to do some mapping around flooding, I'll be doing a little free pop-up for that. It's on the website. There's a training website. Yeah, so we have a lot of classes coming up. Join us for any of them. Or just keep a watch out. We have a lot of free seminars that we do all the time, and we love having you join us. So join us for any of the stuff coming up. And I just want to give a real pitch for Chris's emergency and disaster planning course. It's great. I've sat through it a number of times. And he does a really good job walking through. So if you want to end up with a plan at the end of 6 weeks, that's a really good way to be like, okay, I'm going to work through the pieces. And at the end, you're going to have this plan. And it's going to help you think through things that you might not have considered before the class, which is really great because it kind of brings up a lot of different stuff that may not have crossed your mind. It's like, oh yeah, I need to include that. Let's get that in there. So great class, highly recommend it.
Yeah, and there's some awesome comments. Thanks so much for sharing in here. It's always neat to see what people land. You know, we've got find your blind spots. We got keep plans simple. Somebody said they're really interested in the 4 pillars. That 4 pillars framework is super potent. You know, and again, if you were only to take a few things from tonight, I would think that 4 pillars framework is a really valuable one because you can layer that on to kind of any hazard. Practice what we love, keep our cultures and communities alive. Absolutely. Trauma response breathing. That's really big. Build not only physical capacity, but also mental and spiritual. Just going to kind of jump through a couple here. Living our actual plan, planning for all the people in our community, establishing who is good at what, assigning responsibilities to the right people, and also thinking about the recovery phase. The radio story resonated with me. Yeah, awesome. I'll kind of leave it there, but lots of stuff coming up. Yeah, Charles, let's shift into the question and answer period here. Maybe you could facilitate that. Melissa just said, can you repost the class info though and contact? Her internet connection is kind of coming and going. I believe you. Will you follow up with the replay and the link and everything for everyone by email too?
Yes, everybody on this, everybody who registered, whether they are on this live moment or not, is going to get an email with a link to the recording of this. We'd like to include your slides, Chris. You'll send me your slides.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can send that
we'll
to you.
include those slides. We'll include links to the upcoming classes and invitations to join us. So you'll all be getting that within the next 24 to 48 hours. So that should be coming out as soon as the video is ready.
John Lee put turn liability into capacity, stay humble and adapt. Those are really, really great ones.
Yeah.
D, the point that jumped out at me was when Chris talked about the importance of being prepared and having a plan that is tested, but also not being in a crisis when the crisis occurs. Yeah, that's a huge one right there, which that self-care piece comes in there. Okay, let's see if there's any questions. You could put up your hand and you could ask. You could also put them in the chat.
Yeah, so at the bottom of your screen, there's a little reactions hand thing, and you can raise that. If for some reason technology isn't working, sometimes if you just kind of wave at your screen for about 15 seconds, it'll pop your hand up there. And if all else fails, put it in the chat or just unmute when there's a moment and be like, hey, I want to say something, and we'll get you. So lots of ways to get in. Sheila, I see your hand up.
So I wanted folks to know a phrase that is from boring standard emergency preparedness. That is access and functional needs. And I always laugh when I talk about access and functional needs because honestly, where access and functional needs came from is folks who have disabilities, and they know that a lot of people don't want to say that they have disabilities, but they have these needs that need to be thought about and planned for and with and all that. And so access and see, I was about to say, one of the things about putting everything into the chat and Zoom telling me everything is like I'm listening to two conversations at the same time, the whole meeting. And I'm not a fan of chat. I can write in them, but I don't read them. I can't keep up. And that was just somebody leaving. But access and functional needs are things that can cause you to have, all right, screen reader's going away. Are things that cause you to have more trouble during an emergency than is expected, which what the heck does that mean anyway? But it could mean that you don't know the language. It could mean that you don't know the area. It could mean that you don't have your own mode of transportation, or that your mode of transportation isn't there now, isn't working right now. It could mean that you have a disability of one kind or another. It could be that you have small children in your household that you are caring for, or folks who have needs that you are caring for that you want to make sure are planned ahead about. And this is stuff that a lot of people don't.
Oh gosh.
Hello.
No, that is it.
Anyway, I don't know. I just wanted people to know that. And one of the things I put in the chat, Chris, that I thought of when you were talking about running too fast and thinking too fast and kind of getting into a tizzy that way, as I do this little speed up thing with my hand, I go, remember the turtle. The turtle wins the race every time because he just kind of plods along and he doesn't give up and he just keeps going. That's what I have.
Yeah, thanks so much for weaving that in. Sheila, I feel like you could have just been the closing remarks. Can I just steal you as the closing remarks there? Oh, good. I made you laugh. No, but I do appreciate you I do appreciate you jumping in. I know you have a fair bit of experience in this realm, and you've been on some of the past stuff that I've done here. So I always appreciate the layers that you weave in there, you know. And maybe one thought, you know, within for folks that aren't attending the class, there is a beautiful piece that Sheila just waved in for us there. Within the class, we're going to be kind of addressing this in two different ways. One of the layers, this is what Lila's going to be talking a lot about. And Lila actually works as an emergency manager for the province of British Columbia, or at least she did last time I spoke with her. This is one of her personal interests, is this access and functional needs piece that Sheila waved in. But we're also going to be doing a lot of community mapping as a part of this project. And, you know, for example, within my own community, you know, there is an elderly woman who lives down the road whose husband died last year, you know. And part of our community plan is, now that we know she's on her own, we're putting a little bit more thought. And, you know, if there's a big snowstorm, an ice storm, like, you know, as a community, we're watching out for her. We're checking on her. As a business, you might want to think about, you know, so there's kind of two layers to a business when it comes to this, because it's like, one layer is like, how do I keep our operations alive, right? And from an emergency disaster context, we want to think about keeping day-to-day operations functional. We want to think about our finances, because, you know, and some people say, oh, well, money isn't important in disasters. But if the business goes under and all those people lose their job, well, that is a disaster. That has real consequences, right? So finances is a real part of disaster planning. Your reputation as a business, you know, what if you don't respond well and it impacts your reputation as a business? Sorry. So what if you don't respond well, it impacts your reputation, and then that prevents you from making future money, or you don't respond well and someone gets hurt as a result of it. So that's kind of one layer as a community, is like thinking about your organization being prepared. But another level of it would be like, well, let's say a big disaster happens, like earthquake, hurricane, whatever it is. Does your organization, your business, actually have a capacity to actually give back to the community now? And it's not about money or business. It's like, oh, well, what role could we actually hold? And doing this work, I've worked with a couple organizations over the years and businesses that had an idea that, oh, if this happened, we would do this. But when we actually assessed that, they weren't ready to do that. And there's a decent chance they wouldn't have done it well. But they had an assumption like, oh, we could do this in a disaster. And it's like, oh, you probably shouldn't do that. That actually might not go well. Or if you want to be able to do that, well, we need to develop these capacities so you can be able to do that, right? So that there's just another seed to plant with like kind of the businesses and the organizations, people wearing that hat tonight, is kind of thinking, you know, what would your role be for the greater community in context to a bigger disruption? And that's an interesting one to weave into a plan. Any other questions coming up here, Charles? I don't see any hands raised. Are you catching anything in the chat that we haven't addressed?
No, most of them are just logistic. Like, we're going to send out the notes and the chat. So most of it's just been that type of stuff. Akasha. I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you. And forgive me if this was asked while I had to step away for a moment. Are there any devices that offer the capacity to communicate across the country in the event of phone and cell and internet failure?
Yeah, awesome. So there kind of a couple of things there. And again, we dive into this kind of deep. So there's a major component of the course is emergency communications planning. And that's one of the first things to go down. So for that question though, so internet's down, local lines are down. One thing that you would have to have a pretty large scale event happen to take out the satellite system, right? So there's a lot of things that could impact the phone lines and the internet down here on the ground, but the satellites are still running. You know, if the satellites go down, we're kind of in trouble, right? And there's two kind of ways to access satellites. Traditionally, you needed a satellite phone, and they actually weren't very reliable. They were very expensive. What's actually kind of neat is now my phone doesn't have it yet, but a lot of new phones are actually coming with satellite capabilities as a backup. I think the latest iPhone is actually going to default to satellite when you don't have a signal. And some of those phones, you can't just call somebody, but they will still access emergency services through satellite only. So satellites on some of the newer phones, like satellite capable phones, is one. The other one to kind of look at, and so I spend a lot of time in the backcountry and in the woods. So I have a GPS unit, and the brand is Garmin, Garmin, Garmin. But Garmin has a service called Garmin InReach. And InReach is a satellite service connected to your GPS device. And this is amazing because a Garmin phones are great, but in a disaster, phones are also pretty fragile, right? So it might have satellite capabilities, but does it hold up to the disaster itself? Satellite or GPS units are much more robust than a phone. So my wife and I, because I'm on the road a lot, I'm often kind of 4 or 5 hours away from home. So we actually each have a Garmin InReach device, and we would be able to actually communicate to each other through satellites, even if phone and internet was down through that Garmin InReach. Now we do pay a basic monthly subscription, so it's a little bit more expensive. The device themselves aren't cheap. But the other amazing thing, the Garmin InReach also comes with an SOS button. So when I'm in the backcountry, if I fall and hurt myself, if something happens, I can actually push the SOS button and it sends my satellite location to Garmin, who then notifies emergency services exactly where I am. So for me, I was actually able to justify the expense. Well, I spend enough time in the backcountry, so to be able to have that SOS button with me and to be able to have it as a backup with my wife, that makes a lot of sense. So the first layer I would say is the satellite communications. If the satellite don't go down, there's a whole realm of amateur radio and ham radio. So this is literally when you're talking about people putting up big poles and they have this thing. Ham radio is a very complex and in-depth thing. Um, you need a license to do it. You need a fair bit of knowledge. You need infrastructure. But I was working with a municipality up in Northern Ontario, and they actually have a ham radio station set up in their fire department. And their plan is that if all other communications go down, they will actually switch over to ham. So literally the municipality has ham or amateur radio built into their emergency contingency plan, right? So ham system is a great one, but it's not a kind of thing where you're going to go and do a weekend course and then buy a thing. Like the course is going to take you months. There's a ton to learn. You got to invest in infrastructure, but it's not a bad thing. This is the kind of thing you don't need everyone in your community to become a ham operator, but to have one person in your community that goes and gets that and then sets up the infrastructure, or maybe a team pitches in to build the infrastructure for around it. I worked with an eco village out west, and that was one of the things we actually implemented. They were thinking about the possibility of a big earthquake on the west coast. And as a part of that, one of the people in their community actually said, you know what, I'm actually really interested. Like I would go do the ham course. And then we did some fundraising to buy the ham equipment. So now they have the one ham raider in their area that's able to communicate to other people. Interesting enough to think about how nerdy I am about this. When I went out to BC to travel, I actually found out where the different ham licensed people were and the organization was. So if an earthquake happened while I was out there, I would know where to go to get communications back to my family here, right? If I was trapped out there in the earthquake, and I could at least get a message over here, hopefully try and get it to my family saying, hey, Chris is okay. He's alive. There's no phones, whatever. So satellite and ham would be the two kind of infrastructure systems there. Beyond that, we're talking literally like old school. We're sending runners and meeting places and contingent stuff, which is a part of it as well. So,
and there's developing more and more around messaging that takes time. So even if you have a very limited signal that comes on and off, there's a lot of these apps now that you can like send a message and it just kind of sits out there. Once your signal, it goes out, and maybe somebody else's phone comes on at a different time when yours is off. It'll come in. So like there are a number of the technology is really evolving around. If you don't need synchronous like live communication, but all you need to do is get a message out and get a message back. There's a whole kind of tier of things you can do which are kind of latent in that, like you kind of just put them out there. And eventually, if their systems come on, they'll be able to take them in, and then they can respond to you. And so. Yeah, but this is part of what Chris spends a whole class on, is these communication systems and how you set them up, and how you use kind of primary and third parties and things like that.
Awesome. Well, that might be it. I really hope that people found some value. As you can see, I love this. It's kind of funny, but this is almost my. Oh, Dee wanted to jump on. This is like my training to like take a breath when I find my nervous system getting up, because it's not because I'm stressed, it's because I'm actually excited and passionate about this stuff. But hopefully everybody found some value. Why don't we take Dee's question and then we'll close it off after that. Maybe Charles, could you throw the link down at the bottom one more time just so people can find it, because it's kind of buried in the chat. Hey Dee,
Yeah.
how you doing?
Hey, I love it when you get excited, Chris. No need to apologize for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just quick question. So like we have a group here that are really interested in signing up for the 6-week course as a group. So I will be in contact for like hopefully a larger group rate. Just a minute. But just a question, like I know with like we've worked with youth before, and we've done like wilderness things, emergency shelters and things like that. So if you're kind of looking at this course, is there like potential for modifying it for youth? Because if you work with youth, they always think that nothing's going to happen. I mean, as adults, we think that, um, but it's just the importance of, I think, everybody in community being able, like you said, to do their part. And, and it's like, and working in an elementary school, it's like, yeah, you have age appropriate conversations, but I think it's really important for youth to be a part of just a minute, please. Do you have an emergency plan for snow days? Because we have a snow day here.
Yeah, go snowball fight.
Yes. So how adaptable is the course? Is there potential for doing it with like kids and youth?
The way that this course is delivered, I would think like older youth, like high school kids, could jump into it and find value in it, like kind of as it's offered, if they have an interest already, because it's kind of being catered to people that have an interest. And often, like, when I work with youth, because I've done it in your community before, like part of it is actually not coming in with what I'm interested about. It's like finding what the kids are interested, and then what's the link between what they're interested in and what I want to bring to them, right? So it is kind of focused on working with an interested crowd. But I would say that the systems, if you got creative with it, absolutely, there would be a youth layer that you could say, okay, well, this was a cool concept, emergency communications plan. How do we create a fun version of this that we go and do and send the kids home to do this with their parents tonight? So I think, I don't know that we'll be explicitly talking about that in the course, but I think with a creative mind, you absolutely could. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I'm working with a private school right now. And one of the jobs, they basically hired me to do like a risk assessment for the school. And one of the pieces that of feedback I came back was like, one of the biggest things they can do to mitigate the risk is actually engage the youth in building relationship with risk in the first place and with the habitat and the hazards in the first place. And so one of the suggestions I made to them in their emergency plan is actually, hey, you should actually start engaging the kids with learning about ticks, with learning about climbing trees, with learning about species of trees and how they relate to wind and ice and all these different things, right? So I would say there's tons of layers in this that are absolutely adaptable to youth. I think it's essential to weave that into how the plans play out. We're not necessarily doing like a unit on that or a specific talk on that piece, but it's absolutely adaptable. I hope that's kind of answering your question.
Yeah, because like when you were talking about that each person just kind of falls into their roles, right? That we all have gifts and talents. And I saw this quite evident with like a grade 5, 6 class when we were doing emergency shelters in the bush. And it's like I think as adults we think that, oh well, we have to, do this, do it all. And it was just really amazing, Marlene, Chris, and we just kind of stood back. We taught them, they knew how to do it. I mean, with no tools. And it was just so interesting how you had grade 5 and 6 students fall into roles naturally,
Yeah.
right? That you had somebody kind of step up and just like, okay, this is what we need, just self-motivators. Yep, we'll get this, we'll get the moss, we'll do this. And then you just had those students like, what do you need me to do?
Yeah,
And I'm
beautiful.
just like looking, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like, just to see like them fall into what they were comfortable with and they created these beautiful shelters. So, I mean, that was
Yeah.
the only that came to mind when you were talking and I just said like, oh, I wonder if this is adaptable. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a great example of turning what would often be thought of as a liability into a capacity, right? Because often we would think from emergency planning, oh, like the young kids, they're a liability, like they're going to take our energy. But if we actually flip it, it's like, well, what capacity do those youth actually hold? Because they might actually be supportive. Like a
yeah,
grade 4 or 5-year-old could actually have a role in our emergency plan, right?
yeah,
And if we bring them in the training and the preparation ahead of time, they're going to do even better in that role if
yeah,
things actually go down, right?
yeah,
And when it's youth, we don't necessarily have to frame it in context to like big disasters. We can make it fun, but they're still developing the same capacity.
yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Mhm. And EAT is happy to design specialized classes or programs or pop-ups for particular groups or focus areas. So if you're like, oh, we've got a bunch of kids that want to do this, like we're willing to work with you. Or if you have a particular community that has a particular focus, that's one of the things that we do. Okay, we got a couple more hands, but we do have to wrap up because we did say that it was going to be time, and it's always exciting to see so much interest. But
Yeah, are we going to take one more question there? I think
We'll
there's only
take
one
one
left.
more. Akasha, is that a hand up to ask again, or is that from last time?
Yeah, there is someone that hasn't asked a question yet, so maybe we should.
Elder Wabagoon? I might have said that wrong.
No, you said it correctly.
Okay.
Well done. I have a youth group that I run, and I hire 10 Indigenous youth every summer, and teach them about the land, and we do a lot of tree planting. We do a lot of land-based teachings, and I think it's more a comment, and I think the more that we educate our youth, and then we have youth teaching youth, is very important now. And I think that at my age, I'm looking at it as, I'm glad I lived when I lived, but I want to prepare that next generation. And like we talk about that seventh generation principle of, of all the decisions that we make today will live on for 7 generations, will affect generations to come. So I think that it's so important for us to be aware that our youth are so capable, and that I had bushcraft come in and do a small thing on what if they got lost in the forest, because we were going out onto the land, and but now I think it's a bit more important that they be prepared because a lot of these youth nowadays are sort of living on their own and don't have parents and don't have that family unit, and sort of depend on one another. I think it's important that we educate them as well, to be prepared. And I'm working in the inner city. I see it all the time. So, um, you know, so that was just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you so much for weaving that in. That's actually a beautiful word to close on right there. Bringing in the youth and recognizing the capacity that they bring, and the way that we can support them in developing that capacity too. So thank you so much for bringing that in to close us out tonight.
With that, we probably should just say thank you. Thank you to Chris for sharing his wisdom. Thank you all for coming and being so active in the chat. I want to thank those who weren't able to come but are interested in this topic and are watching the recording. Thank the Earth Activist Training team who did the back end work to make this possible. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you again.
Good afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Jim McGrich.
Miigwech.